It's also easy. We can always meet it. It always works. Anyway, so the first question is about crisis. So based on your work and also based on the 1.5 years in the project, what would you say, just in a brief statement, what are for you the major symptoms of the crisis of social contracts and democracy? Anna.
Okay, thank you, and hello everybody. I switched my topic at the last minute. I decided to speak from Croatian perspective. This is where I come from. So one of the symptoms or one of the indicators of the crisis of democracy would be the crisis of public trust. So in Croatia, where I come from, this is visible in the normative support that Croatian citizens express for democracy. In the Eurobarometer survey of 28 countries, Croatia has the lowest level of support for democracy, and the levels of trust are also low for the parliament, the government, political parties, only slightly higher for the church and the military. But if you wanted to think beyond this crisis, I was thinking and looking into institutions that Croatian people or Croatian citizens do trust. And my proposal is to look at the institution of the European Public Prosecutor's Office. So in Croatia, we have had many high-level corruption scandals, and they were discovered and are being prosecuted by the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Around 28 people were just arrested like 2 weeks ago from the investigation that comes from the EPPO. So in this sense, the European Union, although it is not very popular in Croatia, Ursula von der Leyen is not very popular in Croatia, but Laura Kövesi seems to be popular because Croatian citizens have filed like 458 complaints to the European Public Prosecutor's Office, and this has fallen. It has fallen from first place in the number of complaints from 2023. Now, Germany has the highest number of complaints. It's 719. So my proposal for thinking beyond the trust, beyond the crisis, is to look at maybe specific institutions, not like in general democracy or in general democratic institutions, but to look at maybe some specific institutions that can breed trust and restore trust. Yeah, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I actually would like to focus on the whole idea of social contract, that we have social and contract. Social is maybe in our also project, we also use the term horizontal and vertical. So for social, I mean, who constitutes the social? And in terms of crisis, I guess the whole or the idea of crisis or what we experience is actually sort of the loss or the pessimism for future. I think that's very fundamental because the idea of contract is, at least from the idea of its origin, is the belief that by being part of that contract, you will save at least your life. But I guess what we are dealing right now is this loss of sort of a protective future, especially for the younger generation. We had recently finished 2 research, one on children, one on youngsters in Turkish context, but I think there are many similarities all around the world. Like what we had experienced as child, as youngster is totally different for the next generation. So for me, the social, whether the youngsters, the children are seeing as part of that social or all those excluded groups. So minorities, migrants, who we include the social we are discussing is my sort of main sort of deal within this project also, the whole issue of social cohesion and boundaries, even within a country, but also with the existing environmental problems, the globe as such. Like we need the planet to continue our life, at least the first premise of the contract. From since hopes, we believe that being part of that contract, our life will be saved. And of course, the other maybe sort of challenge the whole our discussion of contract is, okay, we constitute the social, or we the people. Who the people is a question for me, as I said. But then, what are the rules of the game? The contract that we agreed to be part of. And therefore, that decision, especially for the new generation, is a big question mark. So the loss of belief in democracy, for example, because the experience they have with democracy, what they witness throughout their lives, for their loss of belief in education, at least in our case, or the future perspective, what they can dream, or the inability to dream the future, questions themselves because they don't feel like there is a contract. So I guess the whole discussion in our project, especially for particular cases in particular countries, but also with the existing experience of pandemic, I guess that is a kind of a big break, that no longer we can trust certain institutions that they will somehow provide the basic needs, especially for the most disadvantaged group. Being always in the fear of your life, your family, your future perspective creates a big, big problem with the idea of contract. So I think this is sort of fundamental for all of us. Whether that wording is crisis or not, there is something not easy to sort of deal with for each individual. And maybe just a final note, the whole discussion of this individualized resilience idea, that whatever happens, everybody expects you to be resilient individually. And I think that's most of the biggest maybe problem for all of us as a collective. Thank you.
Thank you. I will actually continue on that note, because when I was thinking about the panel, I was also thinking about a recent conversation that I had with a member of a CSO in Finland who work frequently with young people and also discuss their kind of like visions for future. And she was saying that the kind of like the lack of that vision has become more and more concerning. Lately, they have done also surveys and also discussed this on different occasions. And I think that when thinking about crisis, my background is in concepts, and I like time in all of its forms. So I was thinking about the way Helge Hjortheim, for example, has conceptualized crisis as the kind of like a moment where you can try, like a conceptual or a rhetorical device which you can use for trying to create like a temporal order and presentism and sense of urgency to generate them political action and push through decisions and so on and so forth. And then I was thinking, also having recently spent a lot of time not just thinking about social contracts, but also the effects that our digital technologies have for our agency and for our everyday practices. And I was thinking that somehow the combination of using the crisis rhetoric and the abundance of crisis talk, where there actually, by the way, are of course like genuine crisis, I'm not saying that, but having that in the combination of the platforms and the algorithmic logics that follow means that there are kind of like this sense of urgency all around all the time in different ways, and the kind of like fights over whose urgency is the most urgent one. And what I was thinking was that what does this do to our, what kind of pressure it puts on our capabilities of using our political judgment, and on our imagining what kind of agency one can have in those situations without kind of like resulting in or having a sense of paralysis of some sort if you need to kind of like jump on all of the urgency at the same time. And therefore I'm kind of like also thinking that it's no wonder that this kind of like futures horizon is a bit more narrow or even non-existent in the maybe among the younger generations. So this would be maybe the topic.
Can you hear me? The usual question. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Luca Vadu, and I'm a very recent PhD in sociology from Brown University, which you might have heard about in the news recently, unfortunately. Well, the reason I'm saying this is that my concerns about crises stem from my positioning and my training as a sociologist. So I'm actually going to refrain from focusing very much on the symptoms and the usual definitions and democracy, and jump straight to a specific point that I think sometimes gets overlooked. I will warn everyone that my point is a bit of a silver lining, but I'm pumped from the meeting yesterday, and I think we all need positivity in our lives, so I'm going to try to make that case. So at the meeting yesterday, we were talking about descriptive versus normative social contracts, which I think is very useful heuristic. And I think it could apply to crises as well. We tend perhaps to talk about crises in a very descriptive way, but crises can be addressed and perhaps should be addressed normatively as well. In fact, as Anna was just saying, they often are. Just the simple definition of what is a crisis is a normative definition. And discursive practices around crises tend to paint crises as intrinsically bad, as something that is inherently bad, and versus the good life, the good previous situation, and what you are trying to get at the end, which is also a good situation, at least for some people. And then this sense of urgency that comes with crises is used sometimes to enact policy agendas. So it is true that crises can be bad, or at least have bad underpinnings, bad symptoms, or bad elements to them. But I would say that this should perhaps be analyzed pragmatically, or crises should be analyzed pragmatically through their consequences instead of through their symptoms or causes at a certain juncture. And as such, descriptively, perhaps whether a crisis is a good thing or a bad thing should be an empirical question based on the set of circumstances and how they evolve. This empirical question should include perhaps not only the objective assessment of the social fields, of the discourses involved in critical struggles, and I want to emphasize critical struggles, but also not be normatively and even ontologically blind to the possibility, the very likely possibility that crises can be or have at least good symptoms and good consequences. Crises can be a chance to break from the status quo, from rigid orthodoxies. They can be capable of exposing hidden mechanisms of power as well. So rather than generating a sense of despair, the disruptive moment that normally a crisis is associated with could also be a fertile ground for new or marginalized groups and ideas to flourish. So while the idea of a crisis of democracy does seem inherently pretty tough to handle, the struggle for democracy that comes with that idea of crisis can also be a moment for exposing how democracies can be more inclusive and more resilient.
Thanks, Rui. I will continue on this crisis thing, but before that, I would like to say warm thank you for Claudia for organizing this and also inviting us here. We are here, many of us, for the second time since we planned this project originally in Fulda. Had the initial meeting with many of the partners of the Horizon project here. So thanks for having us here again. But I want to go back to the idea of crisis and as a tool of populist rhetoric. So it is kind of a strategy that is used as well in order to claim that we have to do something radically new, or to see that there are some people causing this crisis, or that we have to be dividing the social structure or polity into two. I also was reminded that, hang on a minute, I did publish earlier this year this book titled Birth and Death of Liberal Democracy in Hungary. And this is openly available from Helsinki University Press. You can just go and download it. It's discussing the populist logic of polarization as hegemony. So it's also making a theoretical argument about what is going on. But it also ends in 2010. I mean, we discussed contemporary situation in Hungary and somehow also the contender to Viktor Orbán and Fidesz
Peter Mayer in this book, but basically my analysis ends in 2010 when most analysts of Hungarian politics would be starting in that point. And they would be arguing that populism started in 2010, but actually there was a clear sign of democracy not working already in the 2000s in Hungary. And I started working on this for my PhD and changed my thesis topic actually to look at polarization and look at this challenge that kind of emotional sort of affective polarization from one perspective, but I theorized it as political polarization, the way in which like two sides in politics are just constituting themselves through the opposition of the other. And this is the logic, the polarized logic that I'm explaining in that book as well as in my earlier articles. So the crisis of democracy might be a like more permanent feature in our democracies, and we are always trying to rescue democracy from its internal also destruction. And the second question would be, what kind of democracy are we talking about? Are we talking about liberal democracy, or are we talking about some other democracy? Our project member Alexander Alexeyev defended his thesis earlier this year, actually in the autumn, of Polish and French politics, where he's concretely analyzing how democracy is being redescribed by these far-right actors. So it's not that they reject democracy, they want to claim democracy for themselves and they want to establish in a new way. So democracy is not in crisis, it's in a fluid space. There's always contingency, of course, but now it's being contested and redescribed as illiberal democracy. And what is then what are the symptoms of this process? It's of course more of this racist and xenophobic discourse that has been emerging, and that has been seen as okay by a lot of actors in the society. So it starts from the margin and it starts to spread and erode the basis of liberal democracy. So we had a social contract already for a long time that is not politically correct to be making racist jokes, for instance, as politicians in Finland have just recently made. Misogyny is another feature that you would be seeing as becoming more and more widespread, all kinds of minority rights that are being contested. But also, this is my final point, we are contesting the welfare state-based social contract, which has been part and parcel of democracy, because people don't want just democracy. They actually want to have something more substantive that enables them to live their lives. And in post-war Europe, these welfare states were built in many different ways in many parts of Europe. And now they're being actively contested. And the far right is, of course, doing this intensively in my own country, in Finland, but it's also something where there's becoming a larger consensus that it's okay to increase socioeconomic differences and only secure the lives of some and not all. So isn't that also a part of democracy that is being in crisis?
Okay, so thank you very much taking up on this. I guess there are different possible takes to that. As you know, my view would be that there is a kind of also an inflation of crisis talk. So everything is a crisis. We were discussing the poly crisis yesterday, and then there are those labels. There's the financial crisis, there's the pandemic, there's the war against Ukraine. And then there would be various views on does the crisis just land on us and we didn't do anything to deserve it? Or is it a more profound crisis? Is it a crisis of modernity? Are we living in the Anthropocene? Is it a poly crisis? What is it that we are looking at? That would be one question. And the second question related to this is what does this mean for social contracts? For you who haven't been present in our work meeting yesterday, we really have come in this project to the conclusion that social contracts do not necessarily need to be liberal democratic social contracts. They do not necessarily need to be kind or nice or integrative. They can be exclusionary, they can be racist, they can be misogynist. It works quite well. It can be relatively stable. So we see a lot of developments into this direction. And that, I think, for us in the project was a surprising finding. So my second question, and I would kindly ask you to be a little bit shorter because we would like to have a discussion with the audience, would be if you could summarize how to think beyond crisis. So one way to think beyond crisis, and that has been said, is to say you have a crisis, it's a destabilization of a system, and then you get into another state of the system, which has either proven to be brilliant or which it has changed, and you have a new steady state. And that steady state then obviously could also be something that is totally not liberal democratic. That is something different, that is autocratic. But maybe, so this thinking beyond crisis, obviously, when we sort of conceptualized the labeling of this conference, and it was actually in a discussion with our Fulda team that we said, okay, we would really want to think beyond the crisis. It would be more and more, how can I say that? So maybe not like only in the very dark visions of autocracies.
You want to start from that side?
Yeah, I want to start from that side this time. Okay. So how could we conceptualize more constructive, more positive futures, possibly? And one concept that we have taken or have yet to adopt in the project is the concept of the eco-social contract, which is a figure that wants to include the ecology into the figure of the social contract. So obviously this requires that you believe into social contract concepts being something valuable. And I know at least two people in the first row that will contradict us fervently on this in this conference, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Does it make sense to have these bloody concepts that come from modernity and still use them? Yeah, so that would also be my question to the audience. Does it really make sense to think in these terms? Well, we are obviously forced because the EU pays us to think about social contracts. So we have no choice. But maybe I have a hunch. So maybe it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense to think in these concepts. So please, briefly, how to think beyond crisis and how to reconceptualize a different future, a new steady state or whatsoever. And you start, please.
Short answer, the 15-second elevator pitch that we were talking about yesterday. Thinking beyond crisis would entail thinking critically about crisis. There's two ways that we can perhaps do this. First, looking at crisis through their causes or their symptoms. I mean, there's a long tradition within sociology and other social sciences to look at crisis not as an anomaly, but as a normal feature of the system. I mean, we can go back to Marx. The crises are a part of capitalism. Weber, another approach, but similar outlooks. So there's looking at crises as expected and systemic decentralizes crises, allows us in this way to think beyond the existence of a crisis into sociology and of the future. Another way is to look again at crisis pragmatically through their consequences as moments of opportunity, as moments that are ripe with opportunities to expose the transient attributes and challenge social orders. When we think about it this way through Gramsci, Bourdieu, and other authors, crises can have an intrinsic ex ante element to them, which by definition allows reimagining social futures beyond that crisis and hopefully do so in a positive way. And I will stop here. I have to say that. I felt like you were saying brief.
Well, very briefly put, I think using social contract as a heuristic is a response to this crisis talk. So we are going back to understanding like what was the status quo, who were those who were kind of contracted in this, what was the contract on, imagined to be on, and how and who are now trying to change it. So that's the kind of stuff that we have been working on. And this is the way to take it forward. And of course, like this question of who are being contracted, what is it based on, what are the principles, then when you take it to the eco-social contract, you actually can start understanding the sort of anthropocentric way in which social contracts have been imagined until now in any case, and then trying to expand this framework further. But I think we're going to be discussing about this more in the next 2 days. So I'm not going to continue further.
Okay, thank you. By the way, we can also tell the Commission that we think social contracts is like a concept we shouldn't be using anymore, but I think that's going to be a lengthy discussion. So along those lines, I also think that the nice thing about the social contract talk, so to say, is that kind of like along the same lines that Emilia was referring to, is that we're able to talk about the norms and kind of like get to the discussion, very difficult discussions of kind of like what is it that we have kind of like somehow accepted and what is it that we need to be changing. And I think one of the things that really helps to move beyond is to kind of like not to avoid the difficult discussions, but also talk about like explicitly about values and push back the necessity talk in several applications. And this is also linked to the thing that I was saying about the kind of like creating order to the temporal chaos somehow, is that it does kind of like also enable this necessity. This is only like we have no choice kind of a talk, which is kind of a self-evident thing to say, but I think this is something that we should push back. So being very explicit about the kind of like difficult conversations and not looking away when it's clearly a political choice, or and also bringing like nuances to the political choices that can be there. And then finally, I really need to say that I wouldn't put any pressure on kind of like individual scientists, for example, or researchers that you need to speak up and you need to push back. But I think as a collective action, we could maybe do something a little bit more for the value of bringing in like reframings and also alternative concepts rather than just the very result-oriented expectations that we usually have.
Actually, to follow up, maybe, I guess an important question will be also to think, yes, there had always been crises in human history, at least if we take a more anthropocentric version. But what is new is important, I guess. Like, what is new with the recent crisis? Or if we accept the term polycrisis, or if we accept overlapping, whatever. I mean, there are things that just come up to my mind, but we can, of course, have a longer list. But I guess observing or witnessing every place on Earth through social media and media channels is something different. Like immediately, we are observing the consequences of a disaster. And that's actually beyond our ability to understand and sort of to deal with. So for me, this is very fundamental, like as an individual, as a human being, to witness so much pain, so much war, death of children, whatever. I mean, when you have an enormous list in your hand, this whole also creates a kind of fear or unspoken somehow sadness or pessimism. I guess that is very, very important for all of us to understand. The second one will be probably AI. I think this is, again, a very big breakthrough, which is somehow related. Maybe it's an opportunity, maybe it's a part of the solution. But again, there is a big discrepancy, and it will be more in near future. Those who have an access, those who have and have not. And similar to that, even access to internet. I mean, when you look at the worldwide, there's a digital gap that people experience totally different ways of living. So I guess, I mean, for me, one particular question is, I mean, okay, we cannot use the term crisis, we can find another better version of it, but with the existing inequalities right now, and with the existing problems of the world as such, what are those things that are different compared to previous sort of problematic worldwide existence? And I will just end by saying that I think this whole witnessing all those things that maybe a kind of backlash even from the ideals of the human rights, and observing and witnessing again and again a violation of it create a kind of, I don't know, let's not say crisis, but a loss of belief on human species. And I think this legitimizing the action of sometimes irrational talk or sometimes hate speech in different levels. And again, that everybody hears that talk and observe that nothing happens. So that's again, I guess, a big problem for our social contract or the idea of social contract. And I actually believe in conceptual framework. So I still think that social contract is a good heuristic that we can discuss.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the eco-social contract that you mentioned. And I think what is happening, or at least how it is perceived, I said I will speak from the perspective of Croatia, is that nature is not any longer on disposal. That there is and or at least there should be a barrier, a limit to what we can do to nature. So I think this is new, and I think it is beyond modernity, because modernity had mostly this very optimistic view about how we can exploit, let's say, nature, and now I think we have been changing, or at least that's my that's what I just conclude from like outrage of from the public outrage against cases that are about destroying nature, and I think this is something that we can count on in a positive sense, that the public, at least I said in my country, will transform its relationship or its attitude towards nature in general, in the social contract or the social nature contract. Thank you.
Okay, so we got a couple of buzzwords, I think. We got nature, we got eco-social contract, we got crisis is maybe a permanent feature of change, which is, I think, a thesis that I invite us to think more about. And we got then also the symptoms of crisis, hate speech, loss of trust, etc., etc. I was about to open to the audience, but Emilia has a very short pressing remark.
I just wanted to add something we also discussed in the morning about the how the actors that we are discussing are still quite human. And at the same time, we are doing this research for the European Union, and that's an institution. And at the same time, we are, like, of course, experiencing non-human actors and non-human agencies that are influencing the politics that we live in, whether they would be like from the nature or from AI. So I think we should also keep this in mind when we are thinking about the buzzwords.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So on this happy note, I think we should have two mics. And I think this should be working.
They would not get it. Probably they can't get the comments. Maybe you can just tell them.
Yeah. I try my best.
You have to raise your hand if you want to actually ask a question.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I'm really interested in this idea of social contracts not necessarily being, sort of egalitarian welfare state type settlement. Social contracts can be racist, misogynistic, exclusionary. And I'm thinking about this, with respect to the rise of the far right, and my context is in the UK. And yeah, it would seem to me that there is a new social contract being forged that sort of promises, you know, certain groups a privileged position in society, and sort of it doesn't mean a rolling back of the state, but sort of a you know, increasing of state powers to you know, keep certain people out and privilege particular groups. I'm just curious as to what your reflections on you know, whether the social contract is, you know, how it's being adapted to serve a you know, a more sort of stratified version of society rather than something that's being dismantled.
Okay, I suggest we go for the second question. At least, were there more questions? Okay, so the first question was how the social contract adapts to increasing social stratification and differences between well, groups, classes, etc.
Thank you for the discussion. I just wanted to point out that there is a tendency, at least so far, to frame it as if there was, on the one hand, liberal democracy, and then on the other hand, there were authoritarian forces, and it's a choice either between the two. And I think in order to really address the fundamental problems that we have, we would also need to step out of this framing, because I think that liberal democracy, in the way that it's shaped right now, does not recognize, for example, the need to democratize the economy. This would be something that is essential in order to tackle the problems that we have. So that would be one example for stepping out of this framework. And I think in general, it's not really helpful to act as if there was a nice status quo ante that we would have to return to in order to make things work again, because the crises that we have are to a large degree coming out of structural problems within liberal democracies themselves. They would need to transform themselves beyond what has been established before.
One more question. So the question was whether liberal democracy is really the good term, and whether it's really justified to speak of an opposition between liberal democracy and autocracy, and whether we shouldn't also speak about the flaws of liberal democracy. And positive alternatives to liberal democracy. So I think Christiane has the next. No, okay. So three questions, and then we should probably, is that okay? And open for another round. If we have her question and then give back to the roundtable first. Christiane, is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Please, your question.
Firstly, thank you for the interesting discussion. So there was one point in my mind, but what you said regarding the stratification of the social contract, like how the groups, like there is this power dynamic within the social contract, but like I was thinking about that we have this ideal way of thinking about the social contract, wherein there already in the past groups that were marginalized and were excluded already, and we didn't have this ideal social contract ever in place. First, and secondly, as you were talking about the eco-social contract, I was thinking that who sets the, like, how does this actually work? Who sets the terms of this eco-social contract, and who are the actors who take part in creating this eco-social contract? And then that is how it is linked to this idea of whose voices were marginally, like whose voices were already at the margins, and do they get to take a part in setting up this eco-social? Thank you.
Okay, so I suggest I look. So do you all want to comment on the points? Yeah, you know, so but maybe we don't all. Okay, so maybe I start with Anna then.
Aha.
To change the order a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the excellent questions. I had some. So first of all, I think it's. I'm not going to comment on maybe all of this to keep it brief, but I think it's. I totally agree on the kind of like stepping out from the binary thinking of, and especially from the perspective of having some sort of an idealized historical social contract that we would want to come back to. I don't think this is maybe the To my understanding, this is also not what we are trying to say. So if we are projecting that view in one way or another, then we need to kind of like reflect on that point. Because part of the work that we've been doing in the project also with the leads from lead of colleagues from the American University of Paris has been to kind of like look into the theoretical and historical legacies of these social contracts and kind of like understand also the limitations of this concept and the framing that it's been used. This also goes back to the kind of like historically also marginalized groups and the way in which these marginalizations are also translating into the current social contracts in different ways. I hate to say AI again, but we're going to say AI again. But I think like in one way, like I think, for example, algorithmic discrimination is a perfect example of how the kind of like existing things that we don't recognize are really kind of like solved also then translate into contemporary ways of trying to organize our societies.
Yeah, that was a very nice answer. I mean, we have been dealing with the sexual contract and racial contract and precisely these ways in which social contracts are like originally social contracts were only between certain white men of the establishment. So one question that I was asking myself also in Greece last weekend was as there's the farmers' protest. So is the social contract in Greece actually only between the political elites? And even if you form a new party, you would be becoming part of the political elites and then enjoying the privileges that these political elites have. So then the whole aim of these social contracts is to maintain the power of some over the others. But in the book on Hungary, I actually discussed precisely the person death of liberal democracy because the liberal Democrats failed in trying to ensure welfare for Hungarians. They only wanted to give political rights, and people they're not happy with just political rights. They also want political rights probably, but first they want to have welfare. So that's from my radical Democrat perspective.
Three excellent questions. I will make 2 points that I think I'm more prepared to discuss. First, yeah, I think it's an assumption that, oh yeah, the social contract, we're moving to a no social contract that is racist and all that. Well, I'm pretty sure the current social contract has been pretty racist as well, and misogynistic and all of that. And it has not been working equally for all groups. And that's an assumption that we should not be too quick to move away from as we move to new and shiny things and what critical race theorists call white distractions. The second thing and the second point, and I'm being very brief because I have this cloud looming over me that I was not brief enough in the previous interventions about the eco-social contracts. I will talk more about it in 30 hours from now. So I encourage you to be there. So I don't want to say too much about it, but I will say 2 things. It's a bit of a misconception that eco-social contract is just about the relationship with nature. It started that way, it's true, but then evolved to include social inequalities, human rights, and all sorts of other things. I go through that genealogy briefly then, but I would like to make that point here. And the second, the latest critiques to the eco-social contract are exactly about that. Okay, we have this top-down abstract concept of the eco-social contract that a few eco-socialists really are keen of, but then how does this translate into actual communities and how they marginalize communities especially? So that's where the concept, I say, is going, and that's where the most generative discussions about the concept are going. But more from that in 30 hours.
Just a brief note that the heuristic perspective on the social contract precisely enables us to see who are being left out.
Maybe just because we didn't say the word or the concept of citizenship. I guess it's important, like as a tool, especially when you talk to the public, different audience, like to think the limits of citizenship, but it is important still. I mean, if you don't have a citizenship, any citizen being part of the country, you mean you don't have even the basic. But then if you have a certain citizenship and rights with it, then you can absolutely observe that not all rights, not all citizens have the same rights in terms of on paper, legal terms they have if you're a citizen, but they are not turning into the same equal capabilities. So I guess that's sort of one way to look at the discrepancies or discrimination in practice. So already existing rights and lack of having the same, having real entitlement, turning into capabilities of those rights. But of course, with the existing migration and also the existing world with the whole eco crisis, let's say, we know that citizenship framework will not be enough. It falls short. But as I said, I mean, again, maybe to think citizenship in order to both elaborate on social contract and also limitation of it may be a way to proceed.
Yeah, I was gonna comment and connect to that, to the question, who are the parties to this eco-social contract somebody asked. Yeah, obviously, there's, I want to move beyond this idea of, you know, like this autonomous agent, abstract, the thinking of, you know, like they make the social contract. And I think if we talk about eco-social contract, I think we should talk more about like people embedded in nature. It's like it's very also strange, but like this sense of people being part of nature, of a place, of not this abstract individual. So I think maybe this is the way we can conceptualize who is making the social contract. It's like people, but they're not the abstract people. They're like more nature embedded people, let's say. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. We have our second round. So there's Christiane, there's David, there's Petteri. Did I overlook someone?
Yeah, thank you very much for this insight in your discussion yesterday. Also, there were some very interesting thoughts. My question is a question from the point of an historian of contemporary history, and also a person who is a scholar in Thuringia, where these problems are discussed completely different. And in my mind, I have always the question: how can I convince people to think like we discuss here? If I come back to Thuringia and talk to the people then. My question is, in what scale do we discuss about a social contract? What is the group we expect to have solidarity, and on what basis is the solidarity in this group who makes a social contract? Is this global? Is this regional? Is this local? So what are your ideas about the scale for the social contract?
It seems like you had an interesting discussion yesterday.
Yeah.
Coming late to the thing, I'm just wondering if social contract needs a future. I mean, I guess all contracts need a future, from houses, gift exchange to whatever. And if the crisis is the lack of a future, it sort of seems difficult to think about how social contracts, however they might be organized, with whatever animals or however distributed, if the world was getting worse and worse, then surely those contracts would end sort of supporting us to new disciplinary straining measures. And I don't understand what the basis of discussion would be.
Thank you. This is very exciting. I'm Petteri from the University of Helsinki. I have a feeling much of the discussion is about the outputs of democracy. what it gives to us, and should be trusted to be giving. I'm listening that there's some kind of conceptualization of new forms of social democracy and ecological conscience. Would you like to comment on that?
So who would like to go?
Always ready for this. Thanks for the comments. I'm gonna address this idea of crisis as a lack of a future, which I would refute. Of course, intensively, because crisis is always an opportunity for something new. So this is my Machiavellian perspective on this. That then when things are in crisis, you would at least reflect on this, whatever it is considered to be in crisis. I do see it as a very useful rhetoric also from populists to be embarking on and generating crisis for another future. So I'm going to talk about that also later, so I'm not going to reveal too much here, but like climate crisis is also a possibility for the rethinking futures. It's not that everything will be ending immediately, but that it's sort of alerting us to be reflective. And whether we're reflecting on social democracy or not, I mean, I think social democracy is quite an institutionalist term, perhaps as well, for my type of politics. But the idea that we have needed to form these welfare states in order to make sure that there is no civil war, to ensure that everybody would be well enough off in different parts of Europe, and they were not always social democratic welfare states. They were also kind of more social conservative welfare states. But just this weekend, I got this short message from in Instagram from somebody who would be telling me that, oh, you commie, you're going to be on our elimination list as the first person when the civil war starts. So there is already an understanding among some people in Europe that there should be a civil war where we get rid of all these folk people and establish a meeting. So if you are then sort of reflecting on the basis of these arguments and starting to sort of avoid that type of situation, it's maybe good to be going to terms like the social contract, or thinking what is seen as being in crisis, and would there be other sorts of crisis for imagining better future together, because of course these people are imagining better futures without some of us and our sort of identifications. In the meanwhile, those people who call themselves social democrats are engaging in these identity politics games where they're only interested in having a sort of fragmented set of different identities accepted in the general public, and that's not going to be helping that much in this undertaking. Sorry.
Okay, maybe I can comment on the scale of social contracts briefly. It feels like I can keep really when turning the camera here, but yes. My kind of like, thank you for that question. I think it's a very exciting one, because I personally think that also going back to this heuristic perspective to social contracts, that it actually can be quite useful and different, kind of like on several levels. So kind of like thinking about some local perspectives to that, but then also we are constantly talking about this way we have trapped ourselves into methodological nationalism with this by looking at the state levels, where in fact like in many ways the different kinds of European social contracts kind of like spill over so many different boundaries. But then you could even go for the global scale and think about the types of actual contracts that are kind of like not actual, but types of legal contracts and something that have been, and kind of like then looking at those from a broader perspective. So I think analytically that you can work on several levels, but then the question kind of always goes back to then like, who are you reading into the contract, which was already discussed, and then also the kind of like the definitive power of of what is it that you kind of like. How do you focus your questions then becomes more and more crucial to be reflected on quite transparently. But I think in analytical terms it can be working, and also not just analytical terms, but also when actually kind of like having discussions. So it's a term still which is used at the EU level policy discourses as well. So and not just for scientists, so to say.
Just one thing about beauty. I think this is something I already tried to somehow reflect. Maybe our position is still kind of modernist or progressive in a way, like Emilia's point that like it creates a kind of things will change, crisis also bring opportunities. But I think there's a generational change. Like for children or for youngsters, the future or the expectation of future, imagining future, I guess, I mean, of course, this is still a question for me, but what I heard in the field is different than the way we conceptualize. So maybe for all of us to think and to whether it's there's something particular to Turkish context or whether it's a much more universal generational change, I guess it's an important issue. And just very minor thing is about activist children on ecological issues. They have really high eco-anxiety. They are really among themselves, they create a peer pressure. For example, rather to get into the exam, they have to take at school or to protest on certain days. So, I mean, what is the importance of taking an exam when the danger is about the planet? So it's a really interesting sort of different ways of imagining future and of course, pessimism or optimism. I don't know, maybe the term is not right, pessimism, but a different type of conceptualization of future. And I think it's important for the social contract or the imaginative future in a way.
Okay. No more comments here. Comments from the audience. Tom? Matthias?
Right. Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I feel like there's a contradiction. I don't have so much of a question, but sort of ask you to address one. One hand, you say the social contract has been a problem, but it can still be used as a heuristic, and in crisis there's opportunity for political change. On the other hand, the social contract was always thought as the end of politics in a way, the end of conflict. You know, we agree on something, so we don't have to fight. So there's this contradiction I feel in the discussion between repoliticization, right? We need to fight, we need to struggle, we need to negotiate new things, and then close it down again with a new contract, and then it's the end of politics again. So I don't know how you negotiate these questions in your project, in your discussion.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a little bit of a question. Because you keep on saying that you think of social contracts as a useful heuristic. But I just started to ask myself, for what? So parts of your talk, for me, sound like social engineering, right? You're about who is to be included and a little bit next here. And afterwards, we have a program that you give the European Union, and then it should be shoved down the throats of the citizens. Is that correct? So is that what you mean by purity? Political social engineering?
Okay, so the moderator, I don't have to answer. just one. I think to say that I don't think social contracts were ever conceptualized as the end of conflict or debate or politics, but they are framed, and that I think is a decisive difference. But now I refrain from making any more comments. We have a definition, a working definition of social contract, so maybe somebody would want to give it.
I guess as a title of the project, because I'm continuous
later.
Okay, so the working definition. Okay, so I don't know which question I'm answering to now exactly, but the working definition would have been that it tends to describe a kind of like both material but also imagined relationship between citizens and the type of a government. But that it also includes like top-down, horizontal, and vertical, top-down to horizontal and bottom-up perspectives, which has been added since the proposal writing, but part of the theoretical work. So looking at different types of relations and how kind of like social contract games also is constructed through claims and also through struggles. And I was thinking about, I also, I understand the question about the kind of like social contracts being kind of like the end of politics, but then I think our kind of like starting point has been that this is exactly why it's kind of like also both a useful way of understanding what are the kind of like norms that have been established and should be also maybe challenged from different perspectives. So not to kind of like end the debate, but accept kind of like the constant construction, reconstruction, and renewal, in the sense that there's always going to be contestations and contingency to be accepted, and moving towards like more open-ended rather than closed social contracts. So at least this has been our kind of like perspective to it, but then how to do this theoretically and in practice, working on it. And then, yeah, but maybe I've been talking a lot, so maybe I will stop there and let others too. I think Louis had a point maybe earlier.
Yes, so that's a very fair, actually very fair criticism all around. And I think particularly what you said has much to do with how the social contract never really took up steam within sociology, because we are in general, since Durkheim and the critiques to the Husserlian social contract, we're really not very comfortable. The social contract was anything but social, because the social is based on historicized solidarities and morals that are organic, and the contractual nature of the social contract really put a wrench to that idea. I think, on the other hand, I think that it kind of stopped there with the criticism, and we didn't think of alternatives, we sociologists. And even if we sociologists view the contractual part as the end point in politics, it should have been the beginning point of society, and where society then, through claims and contestation and all of that, could work to modify, through the struggles that I was talking about, could work to modify the social contract. If you take that more continuous, more ongoing, continuously ongoing nature to the social contract, you lose a little bit of the contractual jargon and the Green New Deal jargon, which is very, we're signing stuff almost. But maybe you can view it as a pact, as an ongoing pact that is constantly going to be renewed based on the contestations and the claims that constantly are showing up, which is a very social process, I would say.
I'm not a sociologist. I'm a political theorist, the radical democracy branch. And when these two people came to me at the ECPR conference let's discuss about social contract, there's this really cool call from the commission. I was like, what? Social contract? And then after that, I've been seeing, even before we were funded this call, but like while we were writing this proposal, especially intensively with Anna, I saw everything through the lens of the social contract. Like this was my deconstructive tool for everything. We could see like social cohesion challenges, who are excluded, who are included, what do they imagine that this social contract would be based on. So for me, it's primarily a heuristic. But if you go out there to do politics, you should be understanding that it's like a temporary fixation of that moment of political articulation, that where you then can be analyzed for, of course, what was your definition here? What is the type of politics that our austerity government is doing now? For understanding this, it's really useful to have a heuristic device such as the social contract, and to understand a transition that is taking place from liberal democracy to illiberal democracy, for instance. and to see that no, it definitely did not go into radical democracy, but it went to somewhere else. And then like how can you move this into a direction that would be somehow more inclusive in the moment that there's like a wide scale exclusion taking place. Maybe first you need to be addressing this illiberal social contract in the making that is quite evident in all parts of Europe. We just did this 10-country study, but also beyond. So
just say one word. I think maybe we couldn't reflect the cases as much as we're really discussing. So we have counter examples and historical all analysis in our project, which makes it almost impossible to aim the difficult. I mean, the idea of engineering is totally in a way out of the window because we have all these difficult and historical cases that we're trying to understand.
Yeah, I wouldn't be so much against fixing the frame of politics for at least some time. I think it provides a more transparent and maybe more more transparent way to make claims and to struggle within a certain frame. The problem is, I agree with one of the first comments, that the frame we had was not the status quo was not the best, and it needs we need to contest it and put it into question. But I'm not totally against having a frame in politics, because otherwise, I mean, although I am very sympathetic to Emilia's radical democratic stance, you know, I've lived in a country that lived through a civil war, through a war, and this is how it is when you don't have a frame, you know, like you don't have a social contract, you don't have a frame, you have a war. That's how it is. Yeah.
Okay, so there's David, there's Igor, and there is Kari. David, Igor, Kari.
I'll just follow up on that engineering question. Say you did develop the most wonderful social contract for a citizen. What problem is it that you're addressing? Still not quite with it.
Sort of similar to what you just asked. In my view, sort of historic liberal democracies outsource or externalize a lot of the costs anyway, to empire. But I think one thing that's really missing with those questions, the idea of anthropocene, I'm only going to talk about it anyway. But I think what's kind of missing is the recognition that if there's a huge amount of pain and sacrifice coming our way, any new social contract is going to have to redistribute this in some way, right? So I'm just wondering, where do you see this pain and cost flowing? Social contract, whatever it may be.
Yeah, instead of score, I somehow am missing this kind of distinction between within a contract is always rhetorical negotiation. It is aware in diplomacy, in labor market, in policy and government, this kind of situation. Whereas in that sense, it's something like a temporary end of politics in some way. And of course, that's very necessary. But still, what is still then the end is this rhetorical deliberation, not in the Harvard material, but in the original method of debating pro and contra, speculating about the alternatives, not accepting things are necessary and so on. which is of course the Hoppian social contract. That is not strictly necessary, but theory available. But this contrary point of view would be rhetoric of deliberation in that sense of no, everything is that everywhere has kind of pro and contra. It is the understanding that you are not understanding the question without thinking about the alternatives and so on. And I think that's the problem where I have the whole social concept there. And using politics to negotiation things.
Okay, are there any more questions? Because I guess we will have the closing round now. Okay, so then let's have a closing round. Who wants to go first?
Do you want to start or? So what are we doing and for who? That was the question. I think we are. That's how I perceive it. I think the good side of the concept of a social contract and this project is that we can put the questions that in this very sharp this very sharp way, and we have been doing this. So one of the questions that was posed here, we pose it to ourselves, like what is the social contract that we're talking about? Is it the present one? Is it good? Is it the status quo? Should we go back to that, or should we ditch it? And if there should be a new one, and how will that look like? So obviously we haven't gotten to the new one yet, and how will it look like? But I think I will support Emilia in saying that I think it is a good heuristic to clarify the questions that are important in today in our countries and in the European Union. So it's a good way to make questions, and we'll see if we're gonna find the answer. So it's not guaranteed yet. Thank you.
For me, it's more like with the title of the project, it's a continuous construction. So for me, the contract will also have negotiation as part of it. So it can't be a freeze one ideal type of contract. So it needs to be always with all existing changes and sort of anything that we cannot even dream. So it should be a continuous construction. So my answer will be, we can't find it. I mean.
Yeah, so continuing on that, the ultimate end goal of the project is also not to come up with one kind of like a total suggestion for a new social contract. We probably come up with suggestions of what to take into account. It may be even some imaginaries of what this could be looking like, but for whom, then this will be the question. So, but this is more about kind of like insisting on that continuous construction. And this goes back to what you were saying about the, I see your point on the rhetoric and the negotiation part, but I think this is exactly why it's also an intriguing concept, is that it kind of combines the more the kind of like, if you think about the diplomatic power and the governance perspective to things with the, if we insist on the kind of like still scrutinizing and bringing in the democratic dimension of rhetoric and then agency, I think there's kind of like something we can, I'm hoping and believing that we can capture from that perspective of looking at it, of these different dimensions where we can imagine that some contracts are happening.
Yeah, indeed, it's our sister project that is planning this new social contract for Europe, so we don't have to do it.
Yeah.
He said this. I think also I'm very uncomfortable with this idea of social engineering, but that it's. I was in Greece, and this is the other sister project, Pledge, on grievance politics, that had its meeting there. And it seemed to me that many of the Greeks would rather have a social contract with the EU than their own political elites. So for me, this heuristic approach enables also reflection on trust in society. How is trust generated, and also for instance, with this kind of heuristic lens, you would be able to sort of see what was the problem represented to be, to borrow the idea of Carol Bucky in this interpretive policy research field. So like just seeing what they are proposing, you would be able to, through the lens of the social contract, in order to see like whom is it for and who is it leaving out, and who are imagined to be kind of the actors in that situation. So the continuous construction also would make us all more alert to this attempts of political social engineering on us. So like, it's not that we would be engaging in social engineering, but we would be aware of like what others are doing.
Yeah, very quickly. So briefly. So two very brief points. The first would be that maybe this is my personal touch of OCD, but I like outlines and lists and terms and all of that. So there's a useful aspect to having the social contract in that regard. The second thing, which I think it's probably not the right time to bring that up, but I will do it nonetheless, is that sometimes I feel like we think of old social contract, new social contract, and I don't think. Sure, there's momentous moments of transition where there's a big disruption in the social contract, and we have been studying those in the project. But a lot of the changes happen through time, and we just realize that they're cumulative and mutually reinforcing, and because there's a moment at a juncture where that becomes clear. So I would also vouch against thinking about social contract A and then social contract B, which is completely different as a big leap. I think that's a big conceptual leap that personally I'm not fully ready to make.
No. So we should really close. We have almost two more days. Thanks a lot. That has really been, I think, raising more questions than answers, which is good because we have 2 days to discuss them. Thanks everyone. We should start. Yeah, let's have a 15-minute coffee break. I think everybody needs it. So we start at 10 minutes. So see you in 15 minutes.